Have you ever wondered about the end of the world? Are you looking forward to it, or are you actually worried about it? Do you wonder when it's going to come? Well, today on this week's lesson, we're going to see a little bit about what Jesus had to say about the end of the world. Hello, welcome to this week's lesson. I'm Brian Vermeer. We're continuing our series in the book of Matthew, and we're up to Matthew chapter 24. Again, it is the final week of Jesus' life before he is crucified. He is in the city of Jerusalem, and today he's going to give a sermon to the disciples about the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the end times. Before I begin, I'd like to remind you that if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like button, subscribe to the Mr. Vermeer's Class YouTube page, follow the Mr. Vermeer's Class Facebook page, and if you can, please support me on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Vermeer for as little as $5 a month. You can get access to exclusive audio and videos that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. All right, so Jesus is going to talk about the end of the world. This is a subject that fascinates some people to the point of obsession, and that a lot of others really don't care about. We're going to talk a little bit about maybe some of the different theories regarding the end of the world, but I'm not going to turn this into a discussion about that. If you'd like to see a video talking about all the different theories about the end times, leave a note in the comments, and that is something I've been thinking about doing for some time, so if there's enough demand for it, I'll gladly put one up. Today we're just going to look at what Jesus said, and I may tell you a little bit about what I personally believe the end of the world is going to be like. So what has happened is Jesus and the disciples have come into Jerusalem. I believe this is now Tuesday morning, and they're walking around the temple complex, and the disciples are looking at the temple, and they're just marveling at how beautiful it is. They're telling Jesus, no, just look at how amazing, this temple is. This temple gives great glory to God because it is so beautiful. Which is kind of funny because the temple was built by probably the worst king that ever existed, King Herod the Great, the same king who ordered all the babies in Bethlehem to be put to death, along with several members of his own family. He built the temple simply as a way to please the Jewish people because he knew that a lot of them just hated him. But he built this beautiful temple, and the disciples are just amazed at how pretty it is. And Jesus makes an interesting statement. He says, there's a day coming when not one of these stones is going to be left against another. They're all going to be thrown down. Now, this is actually going to happen 40 years later, when the Roman general Titus invades Jerusalem, destroys the temple completely, so much so that the prophecy is fulfilled. Not one stone is left next to another. You can go through some parts of Jerusalem today and see some of those stones of the temple just lying in the streets. The only part of the temple that is left, and it's actually not even part of the temple itself, is the section called the Wailing Wall. You may have heard of that. And it's really not part of the temple itself. It is the western wall of the foundation slab that the temple was built on top of. Jerusalem is on a mountain, so in order to build a large temple, they first had to build a large flat slab to set the temple on so that it would be level. And that's all that's left, is one wall of that. And the Jews today consider that spot to be very sacred because that's all that's left of their beautiful temple that they had. Well, this, amazes the disciples, and they're wondering about this. Well, later that day, they go out to the Mount of Olives, which is just to the east of the city of Jerusalem. And while sitting on the mountain, it says the disciples come to Jesus and ask him, tell us when this is going to happen. And in the first part of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus talks about a lot of different signs, a lot of things to look for, things that are going to be going on in the world. This is where we get the statement, there'll be wars and rumors of wars, things like that, earthquakes in diverse places, things that people for 2,000 years now, every time a war breaks out, they think, this is it, the end of the world is coming. But Jesus also makes a statement there that this is all just the beginning of the birth pains. In other words, no, it's going to get a whole lot worse than you think it will before the end actually comes. And we're going to pick up now in verse 36 because, again, they're wondering when this is going to happen. So let's start with Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 to 41. Jesus says, "Now concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage, until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know the flood until the flood came and swept them all away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. Then 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding grain with a handmill. One will be taken and one left." This first sentence here, skeptics love to quote this. They love to say, see, this proves that Jesus is not God. Because God is all-knowing, and Jesus here is admitting he does not know when the end of the world is going to come. So how do we answer that objection? Well, it's actually fairly easy. We need to remember the Trinity consists of 3 persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all of whom are God, all of whom are co-equal, co-eternal, all of whom are God. But we also need to remember what Paul said, that when Jesus came to earth and took a human body, he chose to set aside many of the attributes of his godhood. In other words, when he came to earth, he didn't look like God. He took on a human body with all the frailties that a human body has. He got hungry. He got thirsty. He could feel pain. He could get hurt. He could probably even get sick. There were just all kinds of things that Jesus set aside so that he could become fully human along with being fully God. And one of the things that he set aside is a part of his omniscience. He did not know everything while he was in that human body on earth. And there may be reasons for that. Maybe so he wouldn't, let it slip or something. I don't know. But we do know that Jesus chose to set some of that aside, and that's why he says the Son does not know when it's going to happen. Only the Father knows. Now, right now, Jesus is back in heaven, sitting at the right hand of the Father, and he's just waiting for the Father to say, okay, Son, time to go. And we don't know when that's going to be. And it's intentional that we don't know when it's going to be. And in our next section, we're going to see why it's intentional that we don't know when that's going to be. But he gives an interesting statement here. He says it's going to be just like in the days of Noah. He is referring back to Genesis. Now notice he is talking about Noah and the flood as if it is a real historical event, because it was. All these, people who try to say that the story of Noah wasn't real, that it didn't really happen, it's just an old myth, and that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are just fable and allegory or something. Jesus is talking about it like a historical event. He's saying this is the way it actually was. So yes, the flood was a real event that happened in real time on a real earth. The real earth was really flooded by real water, just the way the Bible tells it. And he says that in those days, people were getting married, they were given in marriage, they were eating, they were drinking. In other words, people were just living their normal lives until the flood came. In other words, most of the world, when Jesus does return, most of the world is not going to be ready for it. They're still going to be just living their lives normally, and it's going to catch them completely by surprise. Now, let's look at some of the parallels here. Noah told the people about the end. He told the people that the flood was coming. He warned them about it, just as we Christians need to be letting people know, hey, someday Jesus is going to return. And when he does, if you haven't accepted him, it's going to be too late then. Just as Noah is telling them, look, you need to come on the ark with me, otherwise it's going to be too late. And then one day God tells Noah, get on the ark. And God shuts the door. And once God shut the door, no one else is allowed on board. And even then, the people continued just doing what they were doing until it started raining. Then they realized that Noah was right. An interesting thing that I noticed here when going over this, and I think this supports the pre-tribulational rapture, Noah boarded the ark 7 days before the judgment came. 7 days before the rain came, God took his people out of the danger area. And he let them go on for 7 more days. Then he sent the judgment. Now, you can take that what you think. I think this is an example of the pre-tribulational rapture where God will take his people away from earth 7 years before the judgment actually comes, before the return of Christ. Take that as you will. Jesus says, this is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. In other words, this is the way my return is going to be. 2 men are going to be in the field. 1 will be taken and 1 left. And there's a couple of ways that different people interpret this. If you believe that the rapture will come 7 years before the return of Christ, then you take this to mean that 1 will be taken away in the rapture and 1 will be left. And I think that's the way Jesus intends it here, because again, he's comparing it to Noah. Noah was taken aboard the ark, and the ones left were the ones that were left on earth who were killed in the flood, the judgment was sent on. 2 women will be grinding grain with a hand mill. 1 will be taken and 1 left. Those who believe in a post-tribulational rapture, they're looking at it the other way. They say that the 2 men, the 1 taken is the one that's taken away to judgment, and 1 left. I don't see how that fits, because when Judgment Day comes, first of all, everybody is going to be there. There won't be anyone left on earth when Judgment Day comes. So I just don't see how you can really, make that fit. But that's what that's how they try to explain it. And if you'd like to discuss that in the comments, go ahead and do that. Let's go on now and look at verses 42 to 44, and we'll see why Jesus is deliberately not saying when this is going to occur. He says, therefore be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. But know this, if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not let his house be broken into. This is why you are also to be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Jesus says, look, if I told you right now exactly when my return would be, then probably what would happen is everyone would just go on and live their sinful lives, content in the fact that, oh, well, he's not going to return today. I've got plenty of time. He's not going to return for another couple thousand years. I've got plenty of time. It's not going to affect me. And people won't start getting ready for it until right before they know it's about to happen. Jesus says you need to be always ready. We need to live our lives as if Jesus is coming 5 minutes from now. We need to always be ready. A popular statement is, if Jesus were to return right now, would you be happy with him seeing what you're doing? Well, I hate to tell you, he can see what you're doing anyway. But would you be ready for him to return right now doing what you are doing, living the way you are living? We need to always be ready for Jesus to return, because we don't know. He says, if the homeowner knows what time the thief is going to come, he's going to be there waiting for him. Every so often, one of these people comes out with a date. They say, I've calculated when the return of Christ is going to come. I wish I still had a copy of the book. I finally found a digital copy somewhere, but back in 1988, I had a book called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Occur in 1988. And this guy gives a list of 88 reasons, 88 things that he's calculated that show that he believed it was going to be September 1988. And then it didn't come. So he said, well, I think I did my math wrong. It's actually going to be 89. And then it didn't come again, and you didn't hear from him anymore. And every so often you hear about people who are calculating dates that they believe Jesus is going to return, and they convince their followers to sell everything you have. You don't need anything anymore. And then we're all just going to go out on this mountain and wait. And then it doesn't happen, and the people are completely ruined because they've quit their jobs, they've quit their livelihoods, they don't have any way to live anymore. They've sold everything they have. They've got nothing. I can probably tell you that, I think I can safely tell you that if you hear anybody say they know what day Jesus is going to return, you can probably be sure that's a day it's not going to happen, because Jesus says it's going to come at an hour that you don't expect. I think it was comedian Mark Lowry who once said, I believe Jesus is going to come on a Monday morning. He said, I don't mean this Monday, I mean just any Monday. Because it says that he's going to return at a time when you think it's not, and I think as little on Monday morning as any other time of the week. So the point is we don't know when Jesus is going to return, and we're not supposed to know. Don't waste time trying to calculate it, because you're going to be wrong. It's going to come at a time when nobody is expecting it. That's why we always need to be ready. In other words, the best way to expect the return of Jesus is to live your life expecting the return of Jesus. The return is imminent, but not necessarily soon. Imminent simply means could happen at any time. Could be today, could be tomorrow, could be next week, next month, next year, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now. We don't know. But it could happen at any time. So we need to live always ready for the return of Jesus. Let's finish up now by looking at verses 45 to 51. Jesus is going to tell a parable to try to explain this a little bit better. He says, Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his master has put in charge of his household to give them food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom the master finds doing his job when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But if that wicked servant says in his heart, My master's delayed, and starts to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, that servant's master will come on a day he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus says we need to be like the wise servant. The master has put us in charge of his household. Jesus has put us in charge of earth. We need to be doing our job so that when Jesus does return, he finds us doing our job. If you have a job and you're working at your job and you have a boss, what does your boss think if he sneaks up on you and finds you goofing off at your job, not doing what you're supposed to be doing? You might get fired. You'll at least get reprimanded. But if he finds you working, if he just peeks in your office door and he sees you're hard at work, trying to get your work done, trying to do what you're supposed to be doing, he's going to be happy. He knows he can trust you. And Jesus says that's the way we need to be. So what job has Jesus given us to do? We're going to find it at the end of the book of Matthew. Our job is to spread the gospel, to tell people about Jesus. We're to be like Noah. We're to try to save as many people as we can. Try to get as many as we can to come on board the ark, before the flood comes. One day Jesus is going to return and he's going to judge the world. We need to get as many people as possible ready for that. By letting them know about Jesus, letting them know that they need to accept him as their Savior. And if Jesus returns and finds us doing that, he will be very pleased with us. But if he returns and finds us living a sinful life, doing things that we shouldn't be doing, he's not going to be very happy with us. And it actually gives a description of hell here. This is the same words that Jesus used a few weeks ago when we talked about, judgment. He said, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. He's talking about hell. So if you're not ready, you need to get ready. If you haven't accepted Christ, you need to do that now. Because Jesus is going to return. And when he does, he'll either find a good and faithful servant, or he'll find a wicked servant. One he will commend, the other he will punish. So are you ready for the return of Christ? You need to be. I'll see you next week.